The Galactic Council had been watching humanity for 300 years before they decided to make contact. And in all that time, they had never once considered these strange creatures to be a threat worth worrying about. Ambassador Vethkan stood in his observation chamber aboard the Council's primary station, his crystalline body glowing with the soft blue light that indicated calm confidence as he reviewed the final assessment report on the species known as humans, primitive fusion technology. He read aloud to himself. Average lifespan of approximately 100 standard cycles, prone to internal conflict. Limited to a single star system with minor colonial outposts on neighboring worlds. He had seen hundreds of species rise from their home planets and reach for the stars. And humanity seemed no different from any of the others who had come before them. Just another collection of soft biological creatures stumbling their way into a galaxy they did not understand. The Council had created a special designation for species like humanity, calling them provisional members, which was the polite way of saying they were too weak to matter, but too organized to ignore completely. When the invitation was sent to Earth, the humans accepted with what the Council interpreted as appropriate gratitude and humility. And for 50 years, they behaved exactly as expected. They kept to their assigned sectors of space without complaint. They traded fairly with neighboring species. They honored every treaty they signed. And they never once challenged a Council ruling, even when those rulings clearly favored older and more powerful civilizations. The elder races found humanity endearing in a way, like watching curious children take their first steps into a much larger world. And they were happy to answer the endless questions that human researchers seemed to have about everything. Questions about faster-than-light travel, and how different species had achieved it. Questions about weapon systems and defensive technologies. Questions about the history of galactic conflicts and how they had been won or lost. Questions about biology and medicine and physics and chemistry. So many questions that it became something of a joke among the senior ambassadors, with Vethkan himself once remarking that humans seemed to believe knowledge could be accumulated like currency in a bank. No one thought to wonder why the humans were asking these particular questions or what they might be doing with the answers they received, because no one considered humanity important enough to warrant that kind of suspicion. The decades passed peacefully enough, and humanity remained a mere footnote in galactic affairs, occasionally mentioned in Council meetings when their sector came up for resource allocation reviews, but otherwise completely forgettable. That comfortable situation might have continued indefinitely, if not for the hegemony of Kethval and their supreme commanders' decision that the Sol system would make an excellent addition to their growing empire. The hegemony was one of the oldest and most aggressive civilizations in the known galaxy, a reptilian species that had built their power through conquest and maintained it through fear. And when they looked at humanity's home system, they saw rich mineral deposits and strategic positioning and a population that would make excellent labor. The decision to invade was made without consulting the Council, though the hegemony did send a formal notification as a courtesy, informing the other civilizations that they intended to integrate the Sol system into their territory. Regrettable, but inevitable. Council Mtheth of the Synthesis Collective had commented when the notification arrived. The humans were never gonna last long on their own anyway, and at least the hegemony will put those resources to productive use. Vethkan had felt a twinge of something that might have been guilt as he drafted the Council's official response to Earth, a carefully worded message that expressed sympathy for their situation, while making it clear that the Council would not be intervening on their behalf. The document included suggestions for negotiating surrender terms that might preserve some human autonomy under hegemony rule, along with offers of refugee assistance for any humans who wished to relocate to other sectors before the invasion began. He sent the message and then put humanity out of his mind, assuming that the next time he heard about them, it would be in a historical archive. Entry about yet another species that had failed to survive first contact with a hostile galaxy. The hegemony assembled a conquest fleet of 3,000 warships, which was far more than necessary for subduing a single minor species, but the Supreme Commander believed in overwhelming force as a matter of principle. The fleet jumped into the outer edges of the Sol system on what the humans called a Tuesday morning, their weapons powered and their troops ready for deployment, expecting to receive surrender negotiations within hours. What they found instead was silence. No panic distress calls, no desperate pleas for mercy, no frantic evacuation ships fleeing toward the outer planets. Just empty space and quiet sensor readings, and a single small vessel moving toward them from the inner. System Admiral Yithner of the Hegemony stood on his command bridge and watched the approaching ship with something between confusion and amusement, because the vessel was tiny and appeared to be a diplomatic cruiser rather than anything resembling a warship. "Should we destroy it, sir?" his weapons officer asked, already targeting the human ship with the fleet's 4 batteries. No, the Admiral decided after a moment of consideration. Let them come and beg for terms. It will make for good entertainment before we proceed with the conquest. The human ship came closer and began broadcasting on all frequencies. And when the Admiral opened the channel, he found himself looking at a human female in a simple uniform who did not appear frightened or desperate at all. "Admiral Yithner?" she said in a voice that was calm and professional. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Navy vessel Prometheus, and I am here to inform you that you have entered protected space without authorization." The Admiral's bridge crew exchanged glances of disbelief, because this tiny creature was speaking to them as if she held any power whatsoever in this situation. "You are in no position to make demands." The Admiral replied with a harsh laugh. "Surrender now, and we may show mercy to your population." The human captain's expression did not change. "I understand that from your perspective this appears to be a simple conquest," she said, "and I want to give you every opportunity to reconsider before we are forced to defend ourselves." Admiral Yithner was no longer amused. "Fire a warning shot," he commanded. "Show this creature what she faces." The Hegemony fleet targeted the human vessel with enough firepower to vaporize a small moon, and in the moment before they fired, Captain Vasquez smiled. It was not the smile of someone who was afraid. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The weapons officer aboard Admiral Yithner's flagship pressed the firing control and watched as 17 Hegemony destroyers unleashed their primary batteries at the tiny human vessel that floated alone against the might of 3,000 warships. The energy beams crossed the distance between the fleet and the target in less than a heartbeat, more than enough firepower to reduce any ship to scattered atoms. And every sensor on every Hegemony vessel tracked the incoming destruction with cold precision. The beams hit nothing. The human ship was simply no longer there. And for a moment the Admiral wondered if they had vaporized it so completely that not even debris remained. But then his sensor officer made a sound that the Admiral had never heard before. It was the sound of pure terror. "Sir, the human vessel is behind us," the officer reported in a voice that cracked and trembled. "It moved, sir. It moved faster than our sensors could track. One moment it was in front of us, and the next it was 300 kilometers to our rear." Admiral Yithner spun toward the tactical display and saw that his officer was telling the truth. The tiny human cruiser now floated calmly behind the Hegemony formation, as if it had always been there. "Impossible," he breathed, because what the human ship had just done violated everything the hegemony understood about physics and propulsion and the basic laws of how objects move through space. No species in the known galaxy had technology that could do what he had just witnessed. Not even the ancient races that had been traveling between stars for millions of years before. The hegemony had learned to make fire. The communication channel crackled, and Captain Vasquez appeared on the view screen again, still wearing that same calm expression that now seemed far more unsettling than it had moments before. "Admiral, I am going to ask you one more time to withdraw your forces from this system," she said. "I am authorized to use defensive measures if you refuse, and I would prefer to avoid that outcome." "You have one ship," the Admiral snarled, trying to recover his composure in front of his crew. "We have 3,000. Whatever trick you just performed will not save you from those odds." "I understand," Captain Vasquez replied, and there was something almost sad in her voice. "Please observe the following demonstration." The human ship fired. The Admiral had seen weapons fired in combat more times than he could count, had watched civilizations burn and planets crack under the bombardment of hegemony fleets. And he had believed that he understood what destruction looked like. He had been wrong. A beam of pure, white light emerged from the human vessel. Not a plasma bolt or missile or any weapon system the Admiral recognized. Just light so bright and focused that looking at it directly caused pain, even through the filtering systems of the bridge view screens. The beam touched 17 hegemony destroyers simultaneously, passing through them as if they were not even there. And the ships did not explode or break apart or suffer any damage that the Admiral could comprehend. They simply stopped existing. One moment there were 17 warships, full of crew members and weapons and engines and armor. And the next moment, there was nothing but expanding clouds of elementary particles drifting through the void where they had once been. No wreckage, number survivors, no escape pods. Nothing. 3,000 hegemony crew members converted to dust in less time than it took to blink. The bridge fell silent, except for the sound of officers breathing too fast and too shallow, their scales shifting to the pale color that indicated extreme stress. And Admiral Uthner found that his hands were shaking. "That was Point Defense Protocol 7, Captain Vasquez said into the silence. "It is designed to intercept incoming missiles and debris, and is considered one of our minor defensive systems." She paused to let her words sink in. "Our actual weapons remain offline at this time. I wanted to give you a clear understanding of the situation before you make any further decisions." "What are you?" the Admiral whispered. And for the first time in his long military career, he felt genuine fear. "We are human," Captain Vasquez replied simply. "We are the species your council dismissed as primitive, and your hegemony thought would be easy to conquer. And we have been preparing for this day since the moment we realized we were not alone in the universe." She leaned forward slightly. "I have been authorized to share some information with you, Admiral, in the hope that it will help you make a wise choice about how to proceed. What you just witnessed represents approximately 1% of our defensive capability. We have spent 50 years studying your technology and your tactics and your weaknesses while you ignored us as insignificant. And in that time, we have developed countermeasures for every weapon system in your fleet." The Admiral looked at his tactical display and saw that his 3,000 warships suddenly seemed very small and very fragile. "If you proceed toward Earth, we will be forced to escalate our response," Captain Vasquez continued. "And I want to be absolutely clear about what that means. We will not capture your ships or take prisoners or accept surrender. We will simply remove your fleet from existence, the same way we removed those destroyers." "You would not," Admiral Yithner said. But there was no conviction in his voice. "We would prefer not to," Captain Vasquez agreed. "We have no desire for war and no interest in conquest. We simply want to be left alone to develop in peace." But we will not allow ourselves to be enslaved or destroyed by species that see us as resources to be exploited. She straightened in her command chair. You have 1 hour to begin withdrawing from this system, Admiral. If any of your ships move toward the inner planets during that time, we will interpret it as hostile action and respond accordingly. The hegemony will never forgive this humiliation, the Admiral said. And even he could hear how hollow the threat sounded. The hegemony will do whatever the hegemony chooses to do, Captain Vasquez replied. And we will respond appropriately. But right now, you have a decision to make. You can retreat and save what remains of your fleet. Or you can test whether I am bluffing about the other 99%. She smiled again. I'm not bluffing, Admiral. The communication channel closed, and Admiral Yuthner stood alone on his bridge, surrounded by officers who were looking at him with expressions that ranged from shock to barely concealed. Panic, he thought about honor and duty and the expectations of the Supreme Commander back home. And then he thought about those 17 destroyers vanishing into particles. And he realized that there was no honor in leading 3,000 ships to certain destruction. All vessels, he said slowly, forcing each word past the tightness in his throat. Reverse course and prepare for emergency jump. We are withdrawing from this system immediately. The retreat was not orderly ships scattered in every direction, some jumping to hyperspace without waiting for formation commands, others colliding with each other in their desperation to escape. And within 30 minutes, the hegemony invasion fleet had become a chaotic mass of fleeing vessels. Admiral Yuthner was among the last to leave. And as his flagship prepared for the jump to safety, he took one final look at the tiny human cruiser that floated serenely where his armada had been. He had come here expecting an easy victory over a primitive species. And he was leaving with the knowledge that everything he thought he understood about power in the galaxy had just been proven. Catastrophically wronged, the humans had only shown them 1%. What were they hiding in the other 99? The recording of the Battle of Seoul reached the Galactic Council within 6 hours of the hegemony fleet's retreat, transmitted by a dozen different sources, as panicked survivors shared what they had witnessed with anyone who would listen. Ambassador Vethkon watched the footage 17 times in his private chambers, his crystalline body shifting through colors that reflected his growing horror as he observed the human ship moving in impossible ways and the hegemony destroyers ceasing to exist. The soft blue light that normally emanated from his form had been replaced by a deep crimson that pulsed with each replay of the recording. And by the time he finished his 17th viewing, he understood that everything he thought he knew about humanity had been a carefully constructed lie. He called an emergency session of the full council. The great chamber had not been this crowded in living memory, with representatives from all 800 member species present, either in person or through holographic projection. Their collective attention focused on the central display screen, where the recording played on an endless loop. This is impossible, Councilor Mtheth of the Synthesis Collective declared, their compound eyes reflecting the image of the vanishing destroyers. Our analysis of human technology showed nothing capable of producing these effects. Your analysis was wrong. The voice came from the human delegation's balcony, where Ambassador David Chun stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking down at the assembled representatives of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. The chamber fell silent as every eye and sensor turned toward the human, or rather, Ambassador Chen continued in a tone that was calm but carried clearly through the vast space. Your analysis showed exactly what we wanted you to see. We spent 50 years building the illusion of weakness while we prepared for the day when someone would decide we were easy prey. The silence shattered into chaos as hundreds of species began shouting accusations and demands. some calling for the humans to be sanctioned, others demanding that they be expelled from the council immediately, and still others proposing military action to neutralize this unexpected threat before it could grow any stronger. Ambassador Chun waited patiently for the noise to subside, and when it became clear that the delegates were not going to calm themselves, he simply began walking toward the central podium. This was a space reserved exclusively for senior council members, and no representative of a provisional species had ever been permitted to stand there. Yet no one moved to stop him as he descended from the balcony and crossed the chamber floor. Perhaps they were too shocked to react. Or perhaps they understood on some instinctive level that the old rules no longer applied. Chun reached the podium and looked out at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. These ancient and powerful species, who had dismissed humanity as insignificant children playing at the edge of a universe they could never hope to understand. "I want to be very clear about something," he said, and his voice was quiet but somehow filled the entire chamber. "Humanity has never attacked anyone. We have never violated a single treaty. We have never colonized an inhabited world or stolen resources from another species." He paused to let those words sink in. "We have followed every rule your council established, accepted every insult and every disadvantage that came with our provisional status, and done everything we could to be good and peaceful members of your galactic community." His expression hardened, and when an empire decided that our existence was inconvenient and assembled a fleet to enslave our people, your council sent us condolences, not assistance, not intervention. Just a politely worded message suggesting we negotiate the terms of our own subjugation. You lied to us. Ambassador Vethkan's voice rang out from his position among the senior counselors. You deceived this entire council for 50 years. We survived, Chun replied without hesitation. There is a difference. He looked directly at the crystalline being who had been responsible for assessing humanity all those decades ago. Let me ask you something, Ambassador Vethkan. What would your people have done in our position? Alone and weak and surrounded by civilizations that saw you as either prey or pets, would you have shown them everything you had? Or would you have hidden your true strength until you were certain you could defend yourselves? Vethkan had no answer because he knew exactly what his people would have done in that situation. We studied your histories. Chun continued, addressing the full chamber again. We learned about every species that rose too quickly or showed too much potential. And we noticed a pattern that concerned us deeply. The Veth Empire 6 million years ago, eliminated by a coalition of elder races who feared their rapid technological advancement. The Synthesis Collective's original form, 3 million years ago, forcibly modified and restructured to make them less threatening. The Kethval themselves 2 million years ago, contained and limited until they agreed to restrict their expansion. Chun shook his head slowly. Every species that became too powerful too quickly was crushed or contained or controlled. And we realized that if we showed you what we were truly capable of, you would do the same to us. So we hid. We played the role you expected us to play. We asked questions and appeared to struggle and let you believe we were exactly what your assessments said we were. And while you watched us stumble around in our primitive fusion ships, we were building something else entirely. Something we hoped we would never have to use. Councilor Mtheth leaned forward. What exactly have you built, human? Chun smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Everything we needed to survive. Faster than light travel that does not rely on your hyperspace lanes. Weapons that can bypass any defensive system in the known galaxy. Medical technology that has extended human lifespans by centuries. Artificial intelligence systems that can outthink any computer network. You possess. He spread his hands. We are not the primitive species you thought we were, Counselor. We never were. We simply chose to let you believe it because the alternative was extinction. This is an act of war. A hegemony representative shouted from across the chamber. No, Chun replied firmly. An act of war would have been destroying your entire fleet instead of just 17 ships. An act of war would have been following your survivors back to your home system and doing to your worlds what you plan to do to ours. He turned to face the hegemony delegation directly. We showed you 1% of our defensive capability, and you fled in terror. That was not war. That was a warning. A demonstration that we are not the easy prey you assumed we would be. The next species that sends a fleet to our system will not receive a warning. They will simply disappear, and their homeworlds will wonder forever what happened to them. The chamber had gone very quiet. But we do not want that, Chun said. And something in his voice shifted from steel to something almost weary. We have never wanted to fight anyone. All we have ever wanted is to be left alone to grow and develop in peace. He looked around the chamber at the hundreds of species staring at him with expressions, ranging from fear to fury to something that might have been grudging respect. So here is what happens now. You go back to your governments and your militaries, and you tell them what you witnessed today. Tell them that humanity is not what they thought. And tell them that we have no interest in conquest, but we will not tolerate threats against our people. And then we all go on with our lives as if this never happened. Or we start a war that will end very badly for anyone foolish enough to fight it. He stepped back from the podium. The choice is yours. But I suggest you choose wisely. Ambassador Chun walked out of the chamber without waiting for a response. And behind him, 800 species sat in stunned silence, contemplating a galaxy that has suddenly become a very different and much more frightening place. In the weeks following Ambassador Chun's speech at the council, humanity began to reveal fragments of what they had been hiding for half a century. The revelations came slowly at first. Carefully controlled releases of information designed to demonstrate capability without causing panic. But even these limited disclosures were enough to transform the galaxy's understanding of what humanity had become. The fusion drives the council. Scientists had analyzed and dismissed as primitive technology. Turned out to be nothing more than backups. Emergency propulsion systems installed on human vessels in case their primary engines failed. The actual propulsion technology that humanity used was something that council physicists had long believed to be theoretically impossible. A method of folding space itself that allowed instantaneous travel across distances that would take conventional hyperspace drives weeks or months to cover. A human ship could be orbiting Earth in one moment and arriving at the galactic core in the next, with no transit time and no energy expenditure beyond what was needed to activate the fold. We developed a theory during our first decade of interstellar travel. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo explained to a delegation of council scientists who had been invited to observe a demonstration. The mathematical framework was actually quite elegant once we stopped trying to work within the limitations that your species had accepted as fundamental laws. The council scientists watched as a human research vessel vanished from orbit around Jupiter and reappeared moments later near Saturn, then jumped again to Neptune and back to its starting position, all within the space of a few heartbeats. This is what you were hiding from us, Ambassador Vethkon said softly. Having joined the delegation out of a need to understand how thoroughly he had misjudged humanity. This is part of what we were hiding, Dr. Okonkwo corrected gently. The propulsion system is actually one of our older technologies. We developed it about 30 years ago and have been refining it ever since. 30 years, Vethkon repeated, his crystalline form flickering with colors that indicated profound distress. You have had this capability for 30 years and we never knew. We were very careful to keep it secret. All of our fold-capable ships were designed to also function with conventional drives. And we made sure to only use the fusion backups when other species might be observing. The weapons were even more disturbing. Council military analysts had spent decades studying human defensive systems and concluded that they were adequate for protection against pirates and small raiding parties, but posed no threat to any organized military force. Those analysts were now struggling to understand recordings of human weapons tests that showed projectiles accelerating to significant fractions of light speed, energy beams that passed through shields as if they did not exist, and something the humans called a probability disruptor that seemed to cause matter to simply stop being coherent at the quantum level. The destroyers at Seoul, Vethkan asked during one briefing. The weapon that made them disappear, what was that exactly? A focused application of the probability disruptor, the human weapons specialist replied. It essentially convinced the atoms that made up those ships that they would rather be free particles than a structured arrangement. The process is instantaneous and leaves no residue beyond trace radiation. And this was your point defense system, one of several. We have different systems optimized for different threat profiles. The disruptor is most effective against concentrated targets like warships. For distributed threats, we prefer the cascade array, which creates a chain reaction of atomic destabilization across a wide area. Vethkan did not ask for details about the cascade array. Perhaps most unsettling of all was what humanity had done to themselves. Council medical teams were eventually granted access to human personnel for examination, and what they found defied everything they understood about biological limitations. The baseline human body that the Council had studied for decades turned out to be an outdated model, replaced over the generations by something far more sophisticated. Neural interfaces connected directly to the human brain allowed thought to occur at speeds that made normal conversation feel like moving through thick liquid, with enhanced humans perceiving and processing information hundreds of times faster than their unmodified ancestors. Cellular regeneration systems built into human biology at the genetic level allowed for healing that bordered on the miraculous, with injuries that would kill other species being repaired within hours or days, and the lifespan limitations that the Council had identified as one of humanity's primary weaknesses had been quietly eliminated. With the oldest modified humans now approaching their 4th century of life with no signs of deterioration, we are what we chose to become, Dr. Okonkwo told Ambassador Vethkan during a private conversation. When we realized that we were alone in a hostile universe, we decided that remaining vulnerable was not acceptable. You have made yourselves into something other than human, Vethkan observed. We have made ourselves into something more than human, Dr. Okonkwo corrected. The core of what we are remains unchanged. Our values and our culture and our fundamental nature. But the limitations that once defined us have been overcome. And you hid all of this while we dismissed you as primitives. We hid all of this because you dismissed us as primitives. Your contempt was our greatest protection, because it never occurred to you that we might be worth investigating more closely. Vethkan was quiet for a long moment, his crystalline form cycling through colors that reflected his complex emotional state. Why are you showing us now? You could have kept these secrets forever, and we would never have known. Dr. Okonkwo smiled, because hiding was always meant to be temporary. We never wanted to deceive you forever. We simply needed time to become strong enough that deception was no longer necessary. And we hoped that once you understood what we are, you might be willing to treat us as equals rather than pets or prey. You understand that many species will see you as a threat now. Yes, and some will try to destroy us because of that fear. But we would rather face that challenge openly than continue pretending to be something we are not. She looked at the ancient crystalline being with something like hope in her eyes. We spent 50 years preparing for war, Ambassador Vethkan. But what we truly want is peace. Real peace based on mutual respect and shared interests, rather than the false peace that comes from being too weak to matter. Whether we achieve that peace depends largely on how the galaxy chooses to respond to what we have revealed. Veth Khan considered her words carefully. He had spent centuries serving the Council and believed that he understood how galactic politics worked. But humanity had shown him that his understanding was incomplete. Perhaps it was time for the galaxy to learn some new lessons. I cannot speak for the Council, he said finally, but I can tell you that not all of us want war with humanity. Some of us are simply trying to understand how we missed something so significant for so long, and what it means for the future of every species in this galaxy. Dr. Okonkwo nodded. That is all we can ask for, Ambassador. The chance to be understood rather than feared. Though I suspect fear will be a factor regardless of what we do. Veth Khan made a sound that might have been a laugh. Yes, I suspect you are correct about that. Ambassador David Chun stood at the central podium of the Galactic Council chamber for the second time. But the atmosphere was completely different from his previous appearance. 1 month had passed since the Battle of Seoul, and in that time, the galaxy had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about itself and the species it had dismissed as insignificant. Every seat in the vast chamber was occupied, and thousands more representatives observed through holographic connections from their home systems. Because everyone understood that what happened today would shape the future of civilization for generations to come. Some species had sent warships as well, fleets hovering at what they hoped was a safe distance from human space. Ready to fight or flee depending on how this meeting concluded, Chun waited for silence before he began to speak. You are afraid of us now, he said simply, and I understand why. Everything you believed about humanity has been proven wrong. Your military assessments are worthless. Your defensive strategies are obsolete, and you have no idea what else we might be hiding. He paused and looked around the chamber at the representatives of 800 civilizations. I am here to tell you what we want. The tension in the room became almost physical. We want nothing. Confusion rippled through the assembled delegates, because this was not what any of them had expected to hear. We do not want your territory, Chun continued. We have discovered more habitable worlds than we could populate in 10,000 years. We do not want your resources because we can synthesize anything we need from basic elements. We do not want tribute or submission or worship because we find those concepts offensive to everything we believe. Then why? Ambassador Veth Khan called out from his position among the senior counselors. Why reveal yourselves at all? Why not simply remain hidden and let us continue believing you were weak? Because hiding was always temporary, Chun replied. Because we grew tired of pretending to be less than what we are. And because we remember what it was like to be afraid. He touched the control on the podium and the chamber's display screens lit up with images from human history, wars that had killed millions, genocides that had wiped out entire peoples, plagues that had devastated continents. The slow, painful crawl out of darkness that had defined so much of human existence. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times, Chen said as the images cycled past. We know what fear does to civilizations because we lived it. We know how easy it is to see anyone different as a threat, and any threat as an enemy that must be destroyed. We came very close to proving that intelligent life might be inherently self-destructive, that perhaps every species that reaches the stars eventually finds a way to end itself before it can go any further. The images shifted to show something different. Human cities rising from the ruins of ancient wars. Forests regrowing over lands that had once been wastelands. The first-generation ships leaving Earth to seek new homes among the stars. Children of every ethnicity learning together in schools that taught cooperation instead of competition. But we did not destroy ourselves, Chun said softly. Somehow, against all odds, we chose survival over extinction. We chose to build instead of tear down. We chose the difficult path of learning to live together over the easy path of continuing to fight. Not because we are better than you. We are not. But because we learned that the alternative was oblivion. He looked around the chamber. This is what we are offering. Not domination, but partnership. Not the forced alliance of the strong and the weak, but a genuine collaboration between species that choose to work together. You speak of partnership. Council Mtheth interjected. But how can there be partnership when you hold all the power? Power has always been unequal in this council, Chun replied. Elder races have always had advantages over younger ones. The strong have always had influence over the weak. The difference now is that we are willing to use our power for something other than maintaining our own supremacy. He stepped back from the podium. You can reject this offer if you choose. You can form alliances against us and build weapons and prepare for a war that we do not want but will not avoid if forced to fight. We will not stop you, and we will not punish you for trying. We will simply wait, because here is what 50 years of observation taught us about you. You are not evil. You are not monsters. You are simply afraid, and you have let fear make your decisions for too long. Chun's voice grew softer, but somehow still filled the chamber. We have only used 1% of our power. We would prefer to never use the other 99. But that choice is not entirely ours to make. You can choose war, and we will win it. Or you can choose peace, and we will help you build something better than this council has ever been. A true federation where provisional status does not exist because no one needs protection from their neighbors. Where young species are welcomed instead of contained. Where strength is used to lift others up rather than hold them down. He spread his hands in a gesture that somehow conveyed both power and openness. We are offering you the future that we wish someone had offered us when we were young and afraid and alone. What you do with that offer is up to you. Ambassador Chun fell silent, and the chamber remained quiet for a long moment. Then slowly one representative rose from their seat. A being from a minor species that had joined the council only a few centuries ago and had never been permitted to address the full assembly. We accept, they said in a voice that trembled slightly. My people accept the humans' offer of partnership. Another representative stood, and then another. And within minutes, dozens of species were rising to declare their support for humanity's proposal. Not all of them. Not even most of them, but enough to make it clear that the old order had already begun to crack. Ambassador Vethkan watched the scene unfold and felt something he had not experienced in many centuries. Hope the humans had done the impossible. They had hidden in plain sight while building the power to destroy any civilization in the galaxy. And when that power was finally revealed, they had used it not to conquer, but to offer something better. Perhaps they were naive to believe that partnership could replace the ancient patterns of domination and fear. But perhaps naive was exactly what the galaxy needed after millions of years of species treating each other as threats to be contained. Vethkan rose from his seat. The boss. Crystalline peoples also accept, he declared, and his voice rang through the chamber. We were wrong about humanity, and we are willing to admit that error. Let us see what we can build together. 500 years later, historians would mark this day as the beginning of a new age. The moment when the galaxy finally began to grow beyond the fears that had limited it. For so long, humanity never conquered anyone because they never had to. Species that once dismissed them as primitives now sent their brightest minds to human universities. Technologies that humanity had developed in secret were shared freely with anyone willing to learn. The old council dissolved, and in its place rose something better, built on principles that humans had learned through centuries of painful experience. That true strength meant having the power to destroy and choosing not to use it. Ambassador Vethkan lived long enough to see the transformation complete. his crystalline form now glowing with colors that reflected contentment rather than fear. We thought they were weak, he would tell students in his lectures. But our greatest error was not misjudging their strength. Our greatest error was assuming that strength would be used the way we would have used it. The humans could have crushed us, and they chose to lift us instead. That is why they lead us now. Not because they are the most powerful, though they are, but because they understood something we did not. That the measure of a civilization is not what it can destroy, but what it chooses to build. And somewhere in human space, Captain Elena Vasquez, now centuries old but still serving aboard the Prometheus, looked out at a galaxy that had finally learned to be better than it was. We only used 1%, she said softly to herself, and that turned out to be enough.